so few details on this release? This doesn't seem to be in the transparency of, in the spirit of transparency that Secretary Mayorkas promised here at this platform. There were no cameras, there were no press. Julissa answered very few details about what they saw on that visit.
Well, first, the president, as she conveyed, asked them to go because he really wanted to get a full assessment from senior members of his policy team about what they were seeing on the ground based on meetings, based on conversations with officials from HHS, officials who were running these facilities about what their challenges are, what improvements could be made. And as she noted, they also spoke with children. They'll have, as is a normal part of any internal policy process, they'll have a briefing with him in the coming days. We do look forward to, he's committed to, we are all committed to allowing cameras into these facilities, but we want to figure out the best way to do that, protecting the privacy of the kids in a way that's secure and safe, and certainly that's something we look to do in the future. Go ahead, Steve.
The readout of the visit to the border said that they discussed capacity needs for unaccompanied children. Will they be making recommendations to the president? Is there a need for more capacity?
Well, we know just purely by the numbers, Steve, that there is going to be a need, right? Because we have a large number of kids, unaccompanied children who are coming across the border. We've made a policy decision as an administration that the humane and moral approach is to keep these kids safe and get them into facilities that are safe. There are some limitations, which I know many of you are familiar with because of COVID restrictions and protocols that reduce the capacity at a number of these sites. CDC also put out some guidelines. Many of you may have seen, I believe it was on Thursday or Friday, that will allow for increased capacity at some of these sites. But it is an area of policy discussion. How will we continue to accommodate in a safe and humane way these kids? And our objective remains moving them as quickly as possible out of the Border Patrol facilities. In order to do that, we need to have shelter facilities that are safe, that have access to educational resources, legal resources, health and medical resources, and we need to ensure we have capacity to do that.
Separately, the U.S. has identified 3 online publications directed by Russia's intelligence services aimed at undermining the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines.
Yeah.
Are you aware of it? What can you do about this to counteract?
Well, first, we can reiterate that we will fight with every tool we have disinformation. We are certainly not new to, or we're certainly familiar with, I should say, the approach and tactics of Russian disinformation efforts. And we will reiterate that at every opportunity, these vaccines are safe. They've been approved by the FDA. We will have, of course, health and medical experts conveying that at every turn. And we will look for ways to combat disinformation. But we are aware of it, we are monitoring it, and we are taking steps to address. Go ahead.
You mentioned the historical bipartisan nature of infrastructure. Has the administration made a determination about its next legislative priority, whether it will be a targeted, focused infrastructure bill that could potentially pick up Republican support, or whether it's going to be a bigger, build back better, more sweeping, potentially more expensive effort?
Not yet, Jeff. It's a great question. I mean, our focus, I know we say this publicly, but it is also our focus internally is on the American Rescue Plan and getting it across the finish line, and we take nothing for granted. There are the president's priorities are not a secret. He talked about them. You touched on a number of them. It was a part of his Build Back Better agenda during the campaign. Infrastructure is one of them. Investing in caregiving, doing more to improve access and expand access to health care, addressing our tax systems. But the structure, the size, the format, that has not yet been determined.
On ARP, should we expect a signing ceremony tomorrow or sometime after the House passes it?
I expect once we believe it's on the path to the president, of course, signing it, and I certainly would expect we'd take a moment to do that once it's done.
And what's the administration's plan to make sure that low-income people who didn't file a tax return because they don't make enough income, make sure that they get the money? Because I think in the last go-around, in the previous administration, there were some 8 million people who were eligible but didn't get
for the
money.
tax benefits.
Well, for the $1,400 payments.
For the $1,400 payments. It's a great question. I probably would have to talk to Treasury about their implementation mechanisms here and how they're able to reach those individuals. It certainly is something that when we came in and did reviews of processes that could work better, we also noted during the transition, but I'll have to talk to them about what systems they'll be able to be put in place to ensure more people receive these checks. Go ahead.
Jen, what are the president and other White House officials doing today to ensure that there are no Democratic defections in the vote tomorrow?
Well, I will tell you, having worked all weekend, as I think many of us did, our legislative team, led by Steve Ricchetti and Louisa Terrell, are certainly not taking anything for granted. They're picking up the phone, checking in with offices, making sure they have their questions answered. They're asking the president, the vice president, Ron Klain, other senior members of the administration to make calls as needed. I would say we feel it's on a path to passing the House, and certainly Speaker Pelosi has spoken to that, but we are at the ready. Everybody's on call whenever they're needed, and that certainly applies to the president.
And back on the filibuster, Senator Manchin suggested over the weekend that the filibuster be not removed but reformed. As someone who spent decades in the Senate, is that something that President Biden would be supportive of?
Well, his preference is not to make changes to the filibuster rules, and he believes that with the current structure that he can work with Democrats and Republicans to get work and business done. He's also happy to hear from Senator Manchin and others who have ideas about how to get the business done for the American people, but that's not his preference.
Senator Manchin was also asked about infrastructure, and he said that he felt that any big infrastructure package should be paid for, and he suggested that corporate tax hikes might be one way to pay for a massive infrastructure bill. Does the president believe that the bill should be paid for, and does he support corporate tax hikes as one way to do that?
Well, he spoke on the campaign trail, and one of the items that he spoke about in his Build Back Better agenda was making sure that people paid their fair share, whether it's highest income or rolling back some of the corporate tax cuts. So certainly those are policies that he supports. We don't have a bill or a package yet, so we can have that conversation once we get there.
Got it. And then one last question on schools. Dr. Fauci said over the weekend that he thinks that high schoolers are going to be vaccinated by the fall. We know what President Biden's goals are when it comes to K through 5 kids. Have you made any progress in devising goals for high schoolers?
Well, we are thrilled to have Secretary Cardona confirmed, and he is, as you know, going to be hosting an education summit to talk about the reopening of schools and look ahead to what needs to be done to get that done. And that applies, of course, not just to K through 5 or K through 8, but also high schools. We also are on track to for the president to sign into law the American Rescue Plan, which has $160 billion in it, to ensure that schools who don't have the resources needed can make these facility upgrades as well, get testing in place, hire teachers, bus drivers. But I will leave it to the Secretary of Education to determine the timeline or the path forward for high schools. Go ahead.
Briefly ask on a couple of COVID things. Can you confirm the president will host the Merck and J&J executives at the White House on Wednesday?
Yes.
Why did he go do away with the trip to Baltimore?
We just felt it was a more appropriate place to have the meeting, but he will look forward to discussing with them ways to work forward to continue to expedite vaccine supply and distribution to the American people.
Is there any risk with the event was supposed to happen at Emergent? There was, of course, a report on the weekend over Emergent's history with the U.S. government. Is there any risk that the vaccine production could be slowed if the U.S. has some, problem with Emergent being a supplier to J&J? As perhaps implied by the president declining to go to the facility?
Well, I will say first that the administration is going to undertake a comprehensive review and audit of the national stockpile. And obviously some of that was covered in the story I believe you're referencing. But I have not, our health and our COVID team has not conveyed to me any concern about the timeline or pace of vaccine production.